Hey guys, today I'm going to be showing you how I made my automated Sandshrew Pokemon terrarium. I started off making the head, but I wasn't recording. His head is basically just a ball rolled down to a point at the end. I then added some lines with a needle tool using a reference picture. I made another ball and attached it to the head using my dotting tool and just scraping the edge onto the head. I then go in with a needle tool and mark the lines on his back using a reference picture. After marking the lines with a needle tool, I also go in with a silicone flat edge just to make sure the lines are defined. For his arms, I rolled 2 even sausages, pressing them into the right shape. Later, when I made his arms, I forgot to add the lines on them, so at the end I had to physically carve them into the polymer clay, which was an interesting experience. I definitely recommend adding the lines before you bake him. You have to be really careful at this part not to destroy the lines that you've already made, and don't forget to add the lines that I forgot to do on his arms before baking and not afterwards. It makes the whole process so much faster. I'm adding translucent liquid sculpey. This is really good at making sure that your attachments won't fall off. It's basically like a glue for polymer clay, and I use it very often on lots of small little details that I need to add. Here I'm using it on the ears just to make sure they're definitely secure. I also added this on the arms as well, but didn't show that in the video. These ball tools are some of my favourite. They're really great for blending and making little eye details as well. I got mine on eBay for about $5 and it came with a set of 2. For Sandshrew's tiny claws, I roll out small bits of polymer clay into tiny cones and then cut to the right length. I then add this very gently and carefully with liquid Sculpey onto his little arm. Here I'm using Sculpey 3. I basically use whatever clay I have on hand. I have a mixture of Fimo and Sculpey 3. I've never come up with any durability issues, so I have really no preference. Sculpey is a little bit softer than the Fimo in my experience, but depending on how old your clay is, it will vary a lot. For the eyes, I'm using some plain black Sculpey, just rolling it into a little log so that I can evenly divide the clay into 2 balls for the eyes. Sandshrew's eyes are a little bit of an almond shape, so I'm just going to roll them into a little bit of an egg shape before I add them onto the Sandshrew's face. And I'll be attaching the eyes with some translucent liquid Sculpey. This just makes sure that they stay really well in place and they're not going to fall off. Next I'm adding the little white dots on Sandshrew's face. He also has blue eyes, but I'm adding that later with paint. Here I'm adding a flat base to Sandshrew. I do this because later on it will make it easier for the gears to work to make him move up and down. For the paint layer, I'm using acrylic paints. I'm using Turner's Yellow and Titanium White. I'm using Turner's Yellow and Titanium White because Sandshrew has a little bit of an off-white underbelly and ears, also around his face area. So I'm just going to get a little bit of a yellow tint in there. For the Sandshrew's paint coating, I did about 2 to 3 coats of paint, just making sure that they're dry between each layer. If you want, you can speed up the drying process with a hairdryer. Just make sure it's not on a setting that is too hot for the polymer clay. Again, I'm using Titanium White and just a blue acrylic paint. I'm going to make the blue a little bit lighter with some white to match more with Sandshrew's eye colour. Because we're painting on black here, you might want to do a few extra coats just so that the blue stands out more. For the Pokemon terrarium, I'm using some corkboard to make rocks. The corkboard gives it a nice texture and a rocky feel. I also use pieces of EVA foam floor mats because I have a lot of small scraps left over from my cosplays where I make armour from the foam sheeting. Here I'm using some PVA glue to sandwich the sheets of corkboard together, and then I'll attach them to the cardboard base. I'm using a mixture of Turner's Yellow and red ochre as well as black to make a brown colour. I've run out of brown. If you want, you can just use a standard brown. This is just for the base coat, so it doesn't really matter what kind of brown you use. Here I'm painting the base coat just to even everything out. If you don't have an even coloured base, it just makes it really visible through the sand that we add later on, and it also helps to give your sand depth. I'm adding a darker base here for the rocks just so they stand out a bit more against the sand. Here I'm cleaning up my edges so that in the sand layer it doesn't have a patchy look. Next I'm making a black wash so that I can add some darkness in the little cracks of the rocks to make shadows. After adding the black wash, I remove it almost immediately with a paper towel just by dabbing at it lightly. This makes sure that the base coat is still visible and the shadows are where they need to be and any excess is removed. After the black wash, I'm going in with a soft sponge and I'm going to be adding some highlights on top of the rock. For this, I'll lightly dab at the rock, making sure not to press too hard, otherwise I'll ruin my shadows. When the paint is dry, we're going to add some PVA glue onto the base. Try and avoid the rocks, otherwise you'll get sand sticking to them. So I've got my bag of sand and I'm just carefully pouring the sand over the PVA glue. and letting any excess fall into the bag. Here I've got some little fake succulent plants. I'm just going to be super gluing those onto the sand. I try to spread out my succulent plants a little bit sporadically so it doesn't look super even, just so that it looks more natural. I'll also be adding some rocks and little tufts of grass as well. After all your glue is dry, we're going to start working on the mechanism that makes Sandshrew move up and down. I've got a balsa wood dowel here, simply for the fact that it's easy to cut and I don't need a super durable wood for this piece. I'm cutting the wooden dowel to be the diameter of my bauble to make sure that I can attach the handle. If you're using a saw, just make sure you're using it in a safe area. You don't want to make any scratches on anything important. I have sanded the ends of my wooden dowel so that they're nice and clean and flat. On the end of the wooden dowel, we're going to attach a little stopper and we're going to glue this onto the end of the dowel with some PVA glue. You can leave this to dry while we do the next step. Here I'll be cutting off a 2 centimeter length of the wooden plank. It's important for this wood to be a little bit stronger than the balsa wood because it's going to have more stress on it in the mechanisms, so I've chosen some pine. Once you've sawn off the 2 centimeter strip, just sand the edges to neaten them up. Next we'll be drilling a hole in the wood. This hole needs to be about 1 millimeter bigger than your wooden dowel, and that will allow the dowel to slide smoothly through the hole. Here we're going to make the cog. The cog should be about 1.5 centimeters or 15 millimeters, and the hole for the cog needs to sit flush with the dowel, so your drill bit should be 9 millimeters in diameter so that it fits smoothly onto the dowel. For the cog I'm using some balsa wood. This is just to make it easier to shape. When you're sketching the oval, just try to aim for smooth edges that are rounded. That way your Sandshrew will move in a smoother motion. Our cog is going to be an oval shape, so that at the low point of the oval, that's where the Sandshrew sits the lowest, and at the highest part of the cog, that's where the Sandshrew sits the highest as it rotates. After you drill your hole, just grab your wooden dowel and make sure that it fits smoothly through the hole. If it doesn't go through smoothly, you can just sand the inside of the hole with some sandpaper, and that should make it slightly larger. The dowel should fit easily through the rectangle piece of wood with none of the edges on the inside catching against it. Just be careful when you're sliding the gear on because it can break. To make sure little Sandshrew won't fall out of his hole, we're going to attach a base of cardboard to him. This just needs to be slightly bigger than the hole that Sandshrew sits in so that it will stop him falling out. I'm just cutting off a strip at the side so that the flat side will rest against the flat side of the wooden part underneath, and then I'll be gluing on the base with some super glue. To make sure the gear stays in place, we're going to use some PVA glue. Here we're gluing the mechanism to the cardboard base. To prepare the bauble, I'm using the snipping part of my pliers to remove the tab of plastic on the outside, and then I'm going to go in and pinch off the little remnants attached to the bauble. To colour the base of the bauble, we're going to be using some white spray paint. We're spraying this on the inside of the bauble so that the outside is nice and smooth. Line up the top of your dome with the Sandshrew cardboard base and make a mark where the handle needs to pop out. To drill the hole, I'm using some scrap EVA foam just so that I don't drill into this table. Here I'm lining up the drill bit with the mark we created earlier, and I'm going to very carefully and slowly drill through the plastic. This process works best if you go from a narrower drill to a wider drill, just so that it doesn't put as much pressure on the plastic. Sometimes the bauble will snap if you apply too much pressure. For this part, you can also use a drill bit in a Dremel and slowly widen the hole if you don't have a drill. Okay, so we're up to assembling everything. I'm going to hot glue little Sandshrew into the dome base that we've coloured white and drilled a hole for. You need to be really fast with the hot glue gun to make sure the glue doesn't cool before you put the Sandshrew in place. If the cardboard goes in a little too far, you can use a needle tool to pry him out a little. Just make sure you do that before the glue cools. Now we place the top of the dome securely on the base. It should pop into place. Don't apply too much pressure, otherwise it can snap the bauble. To hold it closed, I'm going to be sealing it with some electrical tape. This also works as the black strip around the poker ball. To make the button, I use polymer clay and craft foam. For the black dot, I use polymer clay and I roll a thin sheet and then cut out a circle with a cookie cutter. For the white part of the button, I take a cap and I press it into a piece of white craft foam. This leaves an impression so that I can cut it out. To glue the button together, I use PVA glue. It works really well to hold it together, but it does take a while to dry. When your button's dry, we can go ahead and hot glue it to our Pokemon terrarium. This is almost the last stage. We just need to attach the handle. Okay, so the last step is attaching the handle. I'm using a small strip of balsa wood and I'm going to cut it into a circle. I've drilled down a little ways into the balsa wood, just enough so the dowel will recess into the handle so that it has a stronger bond. Give the handle a little bit of a sand so that you don't have any rough edges, and then we're ready to use some wood glue to glue it on, and we are done. Don't forget to cut the little dowel to size. And here we have it, your own little moving Sandshrew Pokemon terrarium. Please leave a comment down below if you have any suggestions. I'd love to hear what you guys think. Thanks for watching.